Welcome to the Daily Agenda. On tonight's podcast, we're going to talk about the Religious Studies Project and Ross Downing, the favourite gaslighter, for want of a better description. In fact, I invited Ross to appear with me on a live stream, so no editing, careful editing could be done on either side, and naturally he wasn't game for it. He rejected it. He didn't even think it was beneath him. He just wants to gaslight from the safety of the sidelines without being questioned in any way, shape or form, like most of these lefties. And that's the issue, isn't it, with Downing and the Religious Studies Project, is they're all lefties. And so, you know, if we look at his book, which retails at over £70. No, I've not read it. I'm not going to review it, because under no circumstances am I going to pay a lefty over 70 quid for a book that is just another gaslighting, or a litany of gaslighting, the likes of which I've read so many times before. But this one is particularly, I could have put it, proficient on social media. I noticed him on Instagram infesting and infecting the Odinist groups there, or people aligned to Odinists, those making metalwork and stone crafts. And obviously he's there to inject his leftism and to ensure that none of these groups become right-wing, because only in the land of the purity of eternal socialism, the misanthropic delusion of the left, can anybody be truly acceptable. And so what is the left's problem with paganism, full stop, particularly Odinism? Well, it connects us to our culture. And the whole root of Marxism is to disconnect us from our culture, brainwash us and make us infinitely malleable and pliable to be controlled by the party bosses, which in the Soviet Union, obviously, over 8% of them were Jewish. It's a common problem, isn't it, with paganism and Abrahamism, i.e. anything that comes from the Jews. So that's what Abrahamism is. You know, Abraham was a Jew. Okay, Abrahamism is Jewish, and that includes Islam and Christianity. In fact, there was an interesting piece on the Charlie Veitch show from Manchester yesterday, in which he had a brief interview with a Christian fundamentalist who said, well, you know, we're doing this because, well, Christianity is Jewish. Yes, that's not just the problem. Christianity is Jewish, it's not European. And that's one of the reasons for all of their attacks on paganism, because in the Old Testament, it rails against pagans and claims that we are fallen angels cast out of their imaginary heaven by their invisible friend, God, inverted commas, and that we must be condemned and attacked and stoned to death and burned at the stake and persecuted, mass murdered, harassed, smeared and gaslighted for eternity by this so-called religion of peace. Does this sound familiar? Why do they always use these phrases like the religion of peace, of love and tolerance and forgiveness? Well, we all know that's just a pile of crap, don't we? And anyone who doesn't, well, they're just living in a dream world. And so the left, do they adhere to Christianity? Oh no, not at all. Most of them don't. Liberals, a lot of liberals do, in truth, but liberalism, leftism, it's borderline, isn't it? A borderline mental illness, quite frankly, in my opinion. Leftism most definitely is a misanthropic mental illness. It has just a vague hatred of humanity in general. But where it comes to paganism, they particularly hate right-wing pagans, Odinists more than anything else, because we're connected to our culture and we can't be disconnected from our culture. We can't be dislodged from it. We cannot be separated from ancestral worship. And this is the butt of their hatred against us. And that's why they have to produce these fairy tales. And that's all they are. They're just fairy tales. I mean, leftism full stop is a fairy tale, isn't it? Everything to do with communism is just a nasty little pipe dream. How this thing ever gained traction in Russia probably would beg a belief if you hadn't studied who funded it. And most of that came from their mates on, their brethren on Wall Street. And also the German High Command, who wanted to knock the Russians out of the war. Massive mistake. Massive mistake. If only they had a little more foresight in terms of the disaster they were creating and heaping upon themselves for the next 2 or 3 decades to come. Anyway, that said, that is history, and it can't be rewritten. Well, it can be rewritten. Of course, the left like to rewrite everything, don't they? And speaking of rewriting history, now, if you're a pagan and you're pushing sick, twisted fairy tales like transgender Vikings, and most Vikings were black, or some Vikings were black, then of course, yeah, absolutely, you're totally acceptable to the likes of Ross Downing and his religious propaganda studies, because that's all it is, not a religious studies project. It's just a propaganda outfit spinning lies against right-wing pagans, particularly Odinists, for the reasons that I've said. We are deeply, thoroughly, inseparably connected to our true culture. If a European, that is someone who is both European, paternal and maternal, worships Christianity, they are divorced from their true European culture. Christianity is not European. It's a total fabrication thrown together by the Roman bishops. It's been rewritten over 300 times. I don't care if you're going to have a little rant. You can send me, 228 abusive, malicious communications, which is what I got in July 2019, just for posting a photograph of a woman who had painted runes on her face. Yes, that's how forgiving and loving and tolerant these Abrahamists are. Okay? And all of those abusive messages came from Catholics, Christians in general, Jews and Marxists. It's the same source code every single time, isn't it? And yet they all like to pretend to be the victims of history, espousing a font of wisdom, forgiveness, love and tolerance. Oh my goodness. I can barely keep a straight face when I have to mention the word tolerance in the context of these people. They are absolutely batshit crazy. But in truth, the Religious Studies Project, they fall into the same category because they're on the same witch hunt for exactly the same reasons. Because, as I've said, if you're not espousing their universalism, in other words, in Odinism, they want to believe that because I'm a folkish Odinist, and everyone I'm connected to is a folkish Odinist, and that's exactly the way we're going to stay. And Ross Downing and his little featherweights are not going to make the slightest bit of difference to the way we practice our faith, the true European faith, that is. That's the way we're going to stay. They're not going to change a thing. But because we're not espousing their woke degeneracy, and that's all it is. Now, when they can infiltrate the likes of Ask True UK, which they have done thoroughly and extensively and very successfully, and now they're targeting all the reenactor groups. Well, they're reenactor groups. I don't take any of them seriously as Odinists. Truthfully, I don't. I never have done. They're reenactors. And when they're walking around with rainbow flags, they'll say, oh yes, well, this is the Bifrost. And this is another thing. The Ask True community in the United States has rewritten history this way. Yes, well, now the Bifrost is the symbol of the, the LGBTQB, XYRZ, UV, whatever shit they come out with next community. Yes, absolutely. It's nothing to do with that at all. It's the bridge between this life and the next, with Heimdall at the other end of it, waiting to sound the alarm for Ragnarok. Now, that brings us to Ragnarok itself. Oh my goodness, terrifying, isn't it? Because apparently the new jihad being planned in Europe is not Islamist. It's not Islamist, no. It's not Abrahamic, no. Because only jihad exists in Abrahamism, because jihad is an entirely Abrahamic concept. It has nothing to do with paganism. No pagan believes in jihad. These salient facts, of course, are lost on the likes of Ross Downing and the fairy tale spinners at the Times and other mainstream media comics. So yes, apparently, the new jihad being hatched in Europe, it's being bred in secret, even behind all of those trees there, you see it, yeah, there's pagans everywhere. They're hatching, they're planning and scheming and plotting a pagan jihad, despite the fact that jihad is Abrahamic. In other words, it's Jewish in origin. Yes, absolutely nothing to do with pagans. It is nothing to do with pagans. But pagans, of course, have to take the bait for it, don't they? They have to be blamed for something that is not of their nature, not of their origin, something which they've never practiced and never will practice. So this brings us to the interesting point of a pagan jihad. And we mentioned this in a previous video at the beginning of July when I was down in Sussex. So there is no such thing as a pagan jihad. It's just a sick, twisted fairy tale. And people like Ross Downing and the Religious Study Project, they're entirely responsible for encouraging this train of thought. All of these people are leftists, they're all extremists, they're all pushing a warped, degenerate agenda, and anyone who doesn't conform to it and comply, i.e., most of the Vikings were black, they were from Africa. Yes, of course, my DNA proves it, can't you see? You know, half of my DNA is Vikinger. The other half is Celtic, you know. The Celts were black as well, were they, from Africa? How tiresome. And then, of course, there's the transgender Viking fairy tale as well. And then, you know, we go on to other regions where, oh, yes, of course, well, I remember over 30 years ago, the standing stones of Derbyshire, put there by the pagans, were actually done by the Egyptians. They sailed across here from North Africa and thought, oh, well, there's this lovely little island here, look, you know, let's go on there. And instead of doing it on the south coast where they would land naturally, you would think, let's march right up into this place that later became known as the Midlands, formerly the Kingdom of Mercia, and let's plant a few standing stones and then sod off back to Egypt, where we can carry on being Egyptians. And they left no inscriptions behind them of any description, no hieroglyphs, no artifacts of, it's just, honestly, the people who hatch these fairy tales are nuts. They belong in mental hospitals. But in truth, isn't that the case with all leftists these days? Hasn't it always been the case with leftists? They are extremely dangerous people. And that's the point with the left, is they're out to corrupt, twist, manipulate, pervert and destroy everything in their path, because their mission is to eradicate traditionalism, culture, so that they can, I guess you could say, whitewash, overlay a new culture, vacuous Marxism, umbrella communism. And we don't accept it, and we will never accept it. I will never accept it. And true Odinists, as far as I'm concerned, are all folkish. Universalists live in a dream world. They're communists. We don't accept them. There will never, never be any form of alliance or cooperation between us. We consider them to be persona non grata. They are ostracized indefinitely, which means forever. Ad infinitum, if you want to use the Latin. That's right. And I trust I've made that perfectly clear. And that includes Ross Downing. And because he won't accept the invitation to come on here and speak to me like a man, because he's not really manly enough to do it, he'd just like to pretend to be a man, particularly in his archaeological digs with his long ponytail, imitating being a plastic Viking. Then, of course, I have to make this video in this way, because Downing's just not up to it. It's very unmanly. Perhaps he never studied Holmgang in his religious and cultural studies. Because whilst I wasn't challenging him to a Holmgang, as in two men walk to the island and one walks back, which would have been me, obviously, I was actually challenging him to a live debate in which he was free to put across his warped, twisted agenda. And of course, I was going to lay into it, lock, stock and barrel, with facts and figures, but he's not game for it. He's not game for it at all. He just wants to sit on the sidelines and gaslight pagans, right-wing pagans, Odinists in particular, and we're not accepting it and we're not tolerating it. And all of this drivel about a pagan jihad, well, they're going to choke on it. I can absolutely assure you of that. See, what these people really want is to make a legal issue of it. They want to prosecute Odinists just for being Odinists. That's all it is. They want to prosecute us just for being Odinists. I know this for a fact because of the dealings I had with the counter-terrorism crackpots at HMP Ramby and HMP Sudbury, just because I was a folkish right-wing Odinist and a former member of the British National Party. And how did that end for them? Very badly. They lost, they failed, I won massively, big time, wiped the floor with them. If they want another repeat experience, come and fucking try it. Anytime you feel like it. Come and fucking try it. And I say exactly the same thing to Ross Downing and his religious studies project. And the reason why I use uncouth language is because I'm dealing with uncouth people, idiots, educated idiots with a certificate to say, well, we taught you to believe in these things and you dutifully did that and you regurgitated them in your exam papers to a degree that we felt you deserved a degree. Boom, here's your degree in being a moron. I have no degrees in being a moron. I have honours diploma with distinction in journalism and news writing, and also a further diploma in media law. And I have a string of qualifications in information technology, English language, maths, etc. And also data protection law. So there you go. And I didn't regurgitate any of their claptrap. In fact, I got marked down in the media law course for injecting reality into it, because the one thing the leftists who teach in these colleges and universities can't cope with is reality. They just want to waste everyone's time with the fanciful theories that these people hatch and promote into the world. And I can tell you this, that Ross Downing is a liar and a fantasist. And if he doesn't like what I have to say, well, he can grow a pair, can't he, and come out and face me. Come out and face me. He won't. No. Ross Downing won't do a live debate with people like me. No, he just wants to snipe from the sidelines. He's an extremist because he won't promote transgender Vikings and black Vikings and universalism. And he won't let Pakistanis, if they'd ever be allowed to do such a thing, become an Odinist. You're absolutely right. We won't. Absolutely right, we won't. We will keep our faith and our culture pure, and no one is going to dictate anything to us to the contrary, and certainly not those clowns at Prevent. Okay? I trust I made myself unequivocally clear. What I say goes in my life. No one tells me what to think, what to do, when to think it, how I can think it, when or if I can express it. I make all of those decisions. All of those decisions. And does it not say in the Harvard Mile, just a brief quote, for the likes of Ross Downing and his warped, sinister subversives, left-wing subversives. Speak out against evil wherever you find it and fear no retribution. And that's what I'm doing here, because I fear no retribution for the left or their bent coppers.